Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed participating in the roundtables hosted by Okta and Palo Alto Networks. Our next talk focuses on data-centric security. I'm delighted to introduce Trevor Morgan from Comforte AG, and I will have some time at the end of the session to put your questions to him. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Donna. And hi, everybody. Hope you all are doing well today. And I'd like to say thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about the ongoing Zero Trust movement alongside a lot of other fantastic speakers. But I want to talk about how data-centric security fits into the Zero Trust movement. But first, special thanks to all of you, not only for joining, but for listening in. And I know your time's valuable, so really appreciate it. As Donna said, my name's Trevor Morgan, and I represent the product management and product marketing roles in the US for Comforte AG. Comforte's a company with pretty deep roots in the mission critical space, with a really strong offering in enterprise data protection. So suffice to say, we've been doing this sort of thing for a long time. As you can imagine, we think a lot day to day about data security and how best to protect customers' enterprise data. Which brings me to a question. How does data-focused, I'm going to start calling that data-centric security, fit into the Zero Trust framework? By the way, just to establish the obvious, I'll treat Zero Trust as a framework or a reference architecture. You can call it a paradigm. And I think most other people, if not everybody, does as well. And what I mean by that is it's not a hard and fast standard. It's, in a way, a template. It's a common way for us to talk about these guardrails with enough flexibility, I think, to adjust to all companies, small, medium, large, and super large, even multinational, whatever the size. However, in the US Department of Defense reference architecture, they use a really interesting word. They use the word philosophy in reference to Zero Trust. Now, I don't know about you, but I find the usage of that word pretty fascinating because what it does is it elevates the concepts of Zero Trust from just technical measures and tools all the way to the level of strategic thought processes. And Zero Trust is more about just implementing cybersecurity solutions. It requires a consistent mental shift in design and implementation of security across the enterprise. So just to level set, know that I intend to keep this presentation pretty untangled from the technical and the tactical complexities. I know you're hearing a lot about all of those and probably have before you joined, because all of that can accompany any discussion on Zero Trust or anything that you read about it. We just don't have time in 20 minutes to delve into low-level discussions about concepts like policy enforcement points, or capability taxonomies. What I will do is put a really narrow focus on a part of the Zero Trust paradigm I think is incredibly important, which is the data itself. But first, is Zero Trust an overused phrase? Well, most certainly. All you have to do is a very quick search on the phrase, and that'll confirm that. Is it misunderstood? Well, that depends. No doubt it can be confusing in implementation, especially if this is your first go around with it. This is a tricky one. Is Zero Trust market speak? No offense to any marketing people in the house, because then I would be implicating myself. But absolutely, we see it often used in tandem with market positioning, and that's okay. Zero Trust, in my opinion, is a very practical notion. As long as you don't let the sheer breadth of the framework overwhelm your brain, which is the reason I'm going to keep my narrow focus. And you might be asking yourself, do we need another IT security paradigm? Is the traditional one, which is keeping bad people with bad intentions beyond the borders and edges of our networks, is that not working? Well, we actually do need one. If you look at some of the main drivers that are negating the effectiveness of that posture, any one of these factors alone could legitimately demand change. But look at all of these in tandem. If you combine them all, you have quite a driving force for doing a reboot on how to think about enterprise IT security. In nearly all the literature on zero trust, you're going to find some variation of this statement. And I'll go ahead and just kind of say it out loud. Stop depending, I'm going to add solely, stop depending solely on border and perimeter security. Well, why? Given enough time, given enough incentive, threat actors will find ways through or over or under, or choose your preposition, perimeter security, leveraging security holes, or perhaps they're executing some ingenious new means of entry. If nothing else, these bad actors are very motivated people. They are going to look at a wall until they find a way around it. And by the way, a wall nearly always implies that if you're on one side of it, you're endowed with privileges that every other person or entity, I'll use those interchangeably, gets by default, as opposed to any person or entity on the other side of that wall, that border. And that's the other problem with perimeters. It's that assumed trust part based on location, which gives rise to what zero trust is as a paradigm, and I'll use the word again, as a philosophy. Extend no implicit trust to anyone or anything, even if that user or that application or whatever it is able to get to that privileged side of the virtual wall. Continue assessing, continue challenging every entity's presence and all of the requests for resources and data. Only honor requests when a clear and substantiated need is validated. And then, even when validated, only give the bare minimum to fulfill their request. In 1 minute, I think I've just summarized zero trust. So you're thinking, great, sign me up, sign up my enterprise, let's do this thing, right? And if you've been there and been around that conference table, the next question is, then what? Different vendors, different organizations, different agencies, they all delineate what they think the logical starting point is for a zero trust initiative. Now, because I'm the one speaking here, I want to provide my own suggestion for the starting point, but I also want to back it up with some evidence that the starting point I'm going to suggest actually makes the most sense. In a published proceeding that was before a US congressional subcommittee, it was on terrorism and illicit finance. And I believe that was delivered in 2018. The topic of what motivates threat actors was a major part of the discussion. And if you look through the proceedings, it becomes very clear that bad actors are primarily after data, and they're primarily after information. Whatever the ideological reasons, whatever monetary gain they're after, or, and we all know this, simply the pure delight in sowing chaos. Threat actors are trying to get to, and they're trying to steal companies' data and sensitive information. Why? They want to leverage it. They want to monetize it. Maybe they want to weaponize it. So keep in mind, they want to apprehend and they want to possess this data, not the repository or the resource that's housing it or facilitating it or the network connecting people and devices to it. The reality is, and I think we all know this, if you're an enterprise, they want your data. Sorry. Now, NIST, which is the US Standards and Technology Agency, makes a really similar point in their special publication on zero trust. And if we accept that data is the end goal, and I think we all should, then that's what we should protect first and most vigorously. And I'm going to say that again. That's what we should protect first and most vigorously, the data. And of course, the primary services that support the data or are the main conduits to that information. I keep saying the word protect, but as anybody knows who sifts through all of the information on zero trust knows, we can't find a single silver bullet solution that can protect data and all of the other primary resources that support it across the entire framework. That's nearly impossible, which brings me back to that question. Where to start as a really practical matter? Now, the DoD reference architecture represents this massively expansive cyber landscape by way of a common metaphor, and they use the pillars of trust. Now, The people who know me pretty much know I like being a contrarian. So, of course, I changed the representation of these pillars pretty significantly. Sorry, DoD. That's just the way it goes with contrarians. And I don't mean to be a stickler for structural architecture. And I don't want to read too much into their metaphor, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. A pillar supports something, presumably something of higher importance or to draw the eye. Look it up. When we talk about pillars of a concept or of a belief system, the concept or the belief system is what's most important. And the pillars are there as ways to support and prop them up, to achieve them, as it were. When we put somebody on a pillar, if I put my wife on a pillar, we're shining a light, not on the pillar, but on whoever is being put up there. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing, especially if you're the person being put up there. You break expectations. But not only in the sources I quoted, but in most corners of the IT world, data is recognized as the crown jewel of what an organization or an enterprise can possess. I'd be surprised if you haven't heard that phrase, the crown jewel of the organization. And when you think about it, we call it information technology, IT, just for that reason. So if you buy the idea that data is all important, then shouldn't it sit atop the pillars that support it? Meaning the network, the users, the devices, the applications, the monitoring systems, all of that, they support, they work with, they process that data, but they support it. I see data not as a pillar, but again, not to be too architecture-y, but it's the pediment or that crowning part of the whole structure. So what does this have to do with my question? If you're challenged with that question of where to start, here's a suggestion. Why not start with what's most important? Go to the top. Which is the main goal of the threat actors anyway, as I demonstrated, and first protect the data itself. Okay, now it's time for a little analogy to illustrate this concept of protecting this all-important data. And I'm hoping you didn't think you'd get away without an analogy because I like to use them. So let's get a little medieval and look at the mighty castle architecture of yore to demonstrate some points here. You're going to see lots of perimeters and borders. And by the way, I think this is Dover Castle. Lots of perimeters and borders within this structure and layout. And by the way, nobody's saying not to have borders and perimeters and not to protect them. Just don't overly and solely depend on them and assume they're easily overcome or already have been. So we can move past that and look at other aspects. Castles have lots of ways to isolate attackers on one side away from that or those who are being protected on the other side. Lots of ways to reduce the flow of attackers down to a very narrow control point. It's a phrase that we hear a lot in Zero Trust, and then challenge them over and over and over, even into the final keep and up those winding stairs as the entry gets lower or more and more narrow, and the ability to challenge again and again increases. The whole structure is designed to segment and challenge. And this is the reason I think it's a really appropriate analogy. Sounds a lot like Zero Trust, doesn't it? Segment, isolate, challenge, rinse and repeat. But what if after overcoming all the borders, perimeters, checkpoints, control points, spiral staircases with arrows coming down and swampy modes filled with alligators, what if the attackers arrive at the throne room and they're there to kidnap or kill the king and queen? Because that's what the invaders want. They want to get to the leadership and cut off the head. And the king and queen simply aren't there. They rush in and see what? Empty thrones. Maybe they slipped out a secret passageway. Who knows? It doesn't matter. They're not there. It's not a victory if you're an attacker and you can't leverage the ultimate prize. If the thing of value to you or your army is not there or not usable. The king and queen are still out there, unvanquished. Now you have another worry. You didn't get the final prize. This is what data-centric security can do because it protects the thing of most value in the IT environment, the data at the pediment at the top of the pillars, and make sure that if it falls into the wrong hands, it's just gone. It's just, in a way it's there, but in a way it's unusable. The threat actors can't leverage it. Data-centric security guards the data itself. So In my opinion, that's where you start with zero trust. So the question then becomes how to start protecting the data first, how to achieve data-centric security, security measures that protect the data itself and not the borders, perimeters, and other conduits around it. How do you do that, achieving a pretty good measure of zero trust just by focusing on the data alone? I can mention lots of different ways, lots of forms of data-centric security. And you've probably heard of a lot of them, if not most of them. We can start with classic legacy encryption. It works on the data itself, not on anything around it, basically using algorithms to scramble information. And that makes it unintelligible to the wrong person. Again, think of that invader going in and, the thing I'm after is not there, or at least it's not usable. You can see an example here on the slide. Only those encrypted fields, that's where the ... the ellipsis is, those fields can be much longer. And that becomes problematic. And that's one of the issues among many with classic encryption. An algorithm can be cracked. It doesn't preserve data format. That makes it hard for business applications to work with, at least without a lot of customizations. And it comes with really complex key management. And operationally, it can just be really difficult and expensive and sometimes plain undoable. Like classic encryption, advanced tokenization also completely obfuscates sensitive data. So again, it's data-centric. It's working on the data, protecting the thing of value. However, tokenization can preserve data format, which means, and there's a huge benefit here, business applications can work with tokenized data even while it's in a protected state. One of the main rules is as soon as data comes into that environment, if you can, protect the data, apply data-centric security, and don't deprotect it. As soon as it's deprotected, it's in a vulnerable state. So if you can tokenize and your applications can work with, and your users can work with the tokenized data, even while it's protected, that's a huge plus. Also on a plus side, it doesn't require time-consuming key management. And overall, it's faster to implement, much easier to manage. And it is extremely granular. So you can protect some sensitive data elements, but not necessarily all, depending on the needs. And that's really one of the key points is with zero trust. You want to get as granular as you possibly can. So let's look at data security. Remember, that means protecting what the threat actors are actually going after, those invaders going up the spiral stairs, going into the throne room. But now let's look at it from a cost and ROI perspective. So zero trust stresses no implicit trust. So no matter what pillar you're talking about, go back to the DoD reference architecture, look at the pillars, doesn't matter which one we're talking about, you're going to have to implement very granular challenges and verifications for what's going on. I'll just call it an area, in that area. Lots of enforcement points all across a very segmented IT infrastructure. So what's going to happen is an enterprise is going to wind up spending more and more as time costs as the level of granularity increases, and that's that line. And the break point is, and I just kind of add that as that's whatever the individual enterprise decides is the right level of granularity, commensurate with the costs that are doing something really interesting. Beyond that break point, the enterprise is looking at the costs going up in what you might argue becomes an ever more exponential growth curve. And again, that depends upon the size and complexity of the organization. But as we all know, once you start tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, it never stops, and your costs in time and investment go up. But going straight to the data itself, and that's that shield down there, protecting the data first with data-centric protections like tokenization, that can provide an extremely high level of granularity to the point that all data, and especially the sensitive data elements, are tokenized. They're non-leverageable by the threat actors, by the invaders going up the stairs into the throne room, but they're still workable within your business applications by business users. You can still run analytics applications across it. It doesn't have to become deprotected. So the costs from initial expenditure to ongoing operations for starting with data-centric security are far below even a modest level of granularity across just one of the pillars in the zero trust paradigm, such as the network. I know that's a strong assertion. So I want to give you a real world example, non-exaggerated, with numbers from our organization supporting one of our customers. We work with a major fashion retailer, and they were moving toward increasing the level of granularity, kind of a zero trust premise, just for the network protections of their stores. They were considering implementing multiple layers of firewalls. Basically, they were doing or wanting to do back-to-back firewalls to provide that isolation, segmentation, and granularity, which again is one of those goals, if you look at the reference architecture, of zero trust. Well, that was going to cost them upwards of 13 million, and that was for the initial expenditure toward the solution. But after working with us, they implemented data-centric security on all of the sensitive data, store data. And that was at a cost of around 5 million. So doing some simple math, that's a raw savings of $8 million between what they were just about to spend to deploy and what they actually did deploy. And not to sound like a game show host, but I'm going to, that's not all insofar as all of the savings, because they saved additional millions in auditing and compliance activities, also due to that data-centric security. And overall, they reduced infrastructure complexity, and that also reduced monitoring costs. So a huge savings aside from the raw 8 million saved. And we're just talking about data protection. Another really key point that the zero trust framework descriptions bring up, and go to those documents that I've been referencing and you'll see it, it's that actually knowing where sensitive data is within a complex environment is key to zero trust. A good tokenization solution can also solve your data discovery, data classification, and your lineage tracing problems as well. Remember one thing for me. Data protection depends on knowing everything you can about what you're trying to protect. I can't protect my house if I don't know every aspect of the ingress egress points. You can't protect what you don't know exists. So other benefits in a robust data-centric solution would be the capability of actually finding and understanding that data and then knowing the right protection policies to apply. So I've said a lot in a very short amount of time. Hopefully I'm still under. And here are my takeaways that I want you at least to consider, especially considering afterward, and perhaps do a little investigating on your own. Zero trust, as the DoD points out, it's a change in thinking as much as it's a change in technology. And we have to stop thinking about security in the same old ways. The point of zero trust is to eliminate implicit trust based on locale. That's it in a nutshell. The repercussion, though, of this is that granularity of verification goes up considerably, no matter which one of those pillars, those supporting pillars you're talking about. And an important notion to remember, too, coming away from this is data is the target. It's not the resources or the appliances on the or the applications on the network that they're after. They're not after some Wi-Fi router. Every one of those things is a stepping stone to get to the data. So I would contend that data is not a pillar. It is the pediment at the top of the structure. It is what the threat actors are after. And by the way, another benefit, you've now learned a new word about classical architecture, pediment. Consider data-centric security first, and remember the castle analogy. If they bust through all of the myriad and granular defenses and get to the throne room, and those are all fine and good and necessary within a proper zero trust deployment, and if they get there and what they're after is not there, it's not able to be leveraged, then they have lost, and you've greatly mitigated, not prevented a breach, you've mitigated the breach. They don't have anything to leverage. And I just want to leave you on that last note.
Thank you, Trevor. That was a brilliant presentation. I really love the images of the castle as well. That was, here, when I think of sort of cybersecurity, zero trust, I think so sort of futuristically in my mind. Seeing pictures of a medieval castle was actually a really nice way to put it. So we've probably just got time for two quick questions that I've just seen come in. So my first one is, will we ever find a single silver bullet?
You know what? I I do a lot of reading in just general science, and we're all in science waiting for the grand unification theory. Every great mind's been working on that. Do I have hope that we will? Absolutely. I always hope for that. In reality, though, I think that when that comes along, if it does, that's fine and good. But being able to find the key solutions that maximize the ROI, if you know, it's great if we could all have it in one solution. But if investments and operation costs in 3 get you 95% of the way there, I'll take that too. We never get to perfect. But that doesn't mean we're not going to stop trying. I know my organization is continually looking for new capabilities and ways to expand our platform. But will we ever get there? I think that that's a secondary question. Can we protect as much as we can and achieve zero trust with the minimum amount of very powerful solutions? That's the way I would answer that.
Thank you. And just one more, with a few more, but we've just got time for one. If data-centric security makes data unusable to hackers, isn't that the holy grail?
That's whoever wrote that. That's a very nice setup. I would say so. Again, and that's why the shield in that curve was below the curve. If you can nullify the threat that is posed by a threat actor getting data, and that data is just unusable, it's not even encrypted, and they have to hack through it, which they might or might not. If it is tokenized and the sensitive information is not there, then they have gotten their hands on data. Yes, they've gotten into the environment, but they can't leverage it. And so that greatly mitigates it. Sensitive data is not released. And look at what the regulatory agencies may say about that. No sensitive private information was actually exposed. So that greatly mitigates it. So yes, in my eyes, it is a holy grail. And if not that, that's a pretty bold statement. Start there, because you're going to go a long way towards zero trust by starting there.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Trevor. I'm afraid we've run out of time for now, but that was a really insightful presentation. And we look forward to seeing you again. And for everyone else, please rejoin us in 5 minutes for your next session.